A pleasure to meet y'all at last. And here we are, once again, with films I'm willing to talk about again. So, for this instance, this is going to be a follow-up to the movie Chicken Run. After all, I did state that as long as I had one movie talked about over the years, I would have no excuse to eventually cover any other films that were made after the film's release. And being that I had talked about Monsters, Inc. before, but not so much about Monsters University, I have established that sort of rule in mind. I just simply call it the rule of Monsters, Inc. So, that's basically just the unofficial name that I'm going to refer to this process. As long as I had talked about one movie, I'll have no excuse to not only revisit it, but also cover anything else associated with it. Movies, though, not shows or documentaries. So, in this instance, we're going to talk about Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget, a film that came out less than a year ago. So, it seems only fitting that I not only get to talk about the first film, but despite being almost a year late, Dawn of the Nugget basically does deserve its own chance here in films I'm willing to talk about again. Since this is a movie series now that I have talked about many times over, and how captivated I was back then compared to how I am now, well, let's just say that despite being over 24 and a half years old by the time this sequel came out, Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget unfortunately doesn't quite have the outlying effects that were given to us based on the plot line that the first film offered. It was released in December of 2023. Not quite recent, but still, contrary to many sequels and reboots and etc., this was quite recent for what it is. And it did take quite a while to eventually be made and released as a Netflix exclusive, but for what it is, what I can simply tell you is that being a follow-up to the events of the first film, it almost did feel unnecessary in some regard. Though I will say, it was pretty enjoyable for what it is. The fact that they were able to continue the claymation styling that Aardman was well known for over the years, I will say that the last big occasion where an Aardman film came out was Early Man, and that came out in 2018. And more so, I had already given that film its own unique review in this same room, coincidentally. But yeah, that was a part of films I should have talked about years ago, Season 2, alongside many others that I have never had the chance to talk about. And I know that next year, I do plan on having a lot more worth of that content specifically. Until then, though, films I'm willing to talk about again, it's just what I'm sticking to here. Probably one big problem that I've had with this film is the lack of the actors that were well known from the first film. Mainly with Julie Sawalha and Mel Gibson. But we do instead get the likes of Thandie Newton and Zachary Levi. And just think about it for a minute. Being 23 years after the first film, some people really gone on ahead to argue that Julie was too old for her own role, which is complete blasphemy if you ask me. I mean, look at how old Peter Cullen is. And the fact is that even though he's technically laying off his role as Optimus Prime, he still was able to put in lots of Optimus Prime effort, even at the ages of 83 and 84. That is insane. It really goes to show that some actors are truly committed to their work and are willing to do it for as long as they possibly can. But you know what though? Overlooking this sort of problem here, I feel like that one other thing is that it just invokes the idea of, let's say, the offspring of a certain chicken duo. Because basically what happens here is that in the sequel, we are introduced to the character Molly, whom is in fact Ginger and Rocky's daughter. So, they're basically out in their island of paradise, the very same island of paradise that Ginger had revealed to the other chickens back at the Yorkshire farm known as Tweety's farm in the first film. And the thing is that the fact that they're able to continuously allow for good life to occur, lots of working, lots of fun, and lots of other things around here and there, recreation, rest from all the crap work that they've had to deal with back at that farm, and more importantly, a life away from their tormentors, the Tweety couple themselves. But that detail will become important in a bit, because what happens is that there's an idea that pops in Molly's head, that she's a bit bored with life inside this paradise of theirs, and she wants to go out exploring outside the island. However, the likes of Ginger and Rocky, they make sure that she doesn't even bother with that. And we do at least get the sort of zany humor that is expected from Rocky the Rooster, much like how we've had in the first film, where he does at least become a unique charm to the many chickens at the Tweety's farm itself. And here in the second film, we get a similar level here, and with Zachary Levi, they were able to up the ante a little bit, because Levi is well known for being rather comedic. But to be fair, Mel Gibson was a unique role that they were able to assign specifically for the character. And more importantly, the fact that Gibson is still alive as well really just screams a lot of questions. Like, why would they do that? Why would they just continuously change the many actors and characters' voices individually? Almost like it's a complete rebrandish. But enough about that. Obviously, Molly's not allowed to leave, but when she eventually does sneak out of paradise, she does end up in a not-so-great spot. She is thankfully able to meet up with a friend whom just so happens to be going to a very certain place. You see, there is this certain facility that has had some advertisements which supposedly tells us about the quality of chicken not doing so well because the chickens themselves are just not happy. I don't know if that's really true, that the idea of an animal becoming happy apparently makes the meat even tastier. Does anything in order to make it taste better? I mean, have you ever had beef before? Has the cow ever been sad or happy? It's not easy for us to tell exactly how it goes down. But one thing's for sure though, the idea of at least using chickens and trying to make them feel happy before grinding them up into a chickeny meaty pulp, it does seem pretty convincing by all means. The thing is though, is that this new place, which proves to be even more of a terrifying threat in contrast to Tweety's farm, in which all they had to do was to build an aircraft to get out of there. But in this instance, we got an even bigger series of problems to deal with. And it is up to the likes of Ginger and Rocky, as well as some assistance from the likes of Bunty, Babs, and even the brains of the bunch known as Mac. Basically, the small team goes in after the likes of Molly as well as her new friend, whom are basically trapped inside this place. It seems to be a happy place, but moreover, they're given these sort of collars, in fact, which they hypnotize them, allow them to become happy. And so it eventually goes to a point where Molly does in fact become suspicious of the whole thing, and she does try to look into whatever she can find in order to prevent any of these chickens from meeting their certain doom, while we are in fact given the very impressive info on how it's all put together. Because after all, the man in charge of this facility is eventually walking into the building to be greeted by some nearby representatives of the company, including a Dr. Fry. Now, Fry? That was an interesting thing that I had heard. Think about it. Futurama made an 11th season by 2023. In the very same year, we have Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget, and both series apparently now have a character named Fry. I don't know if that's coincidental, or if it's just an impressive connection they put together here. Like this is Fry's distant relative from the past, or something like that. In which case, as the team of 5 basically getting closer to the facility and try to work their way around the many death traps, we once again get to see Rocky being at probably his most stupidest thing we've ever seen. The fact that he was able to vault over the fences is one thing. The fact he was able to get zapped by lasers is another thing. Blown up by underwater mines is another thing. And basically just being a huge loser is yet another thing. It's basically like the combination of Crash Bandicoot and probably the dumbest people who ever lived on Earth. So he's definitely nothing compared to the so-called inspiration that people found in the first film. The inspiration to try and fly out of the farm, the inspiration to try and stay strong even in the darkest of times, the inspiration, especially that Ginger was convinced that Rocky could actually be the solution to their problem. He is nothing like that here. I mean, he barely puts in effort of his own accord, and that's technically way against the character that we've come to know and love that Mel Gibson was so well known for at that point. And being only 5 years after his last success at the time, which was Braveheart, that was really a deal to a lot of people. It really just makes me even more intrigued on the idea that maybe if Mel Gibson had come back and reprised his own role, we could have definitely gotten something even more impressive. But you know what? Zachary Levi, I'm more than willing to just forgive and let that be well enough alone. So, remember when I said that the Tweety couple had basically just halted everything after this point when the first film came to an end? Well, guess what? In a similar fashion to how Mrs. Tweety was introduced in the first film, she comes back in the second film. Like how? That door fell flat on her face. How did that not even kill her? How did that not... Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a pretty sad, pitiful excuse. I mean, to bring back a dark, horrible, villainous character from the year 2000. In the year 2023, it almost seems like creativity was at a dead end. But surprise, surprise, they still were able to put in a lot of good success in the film industry. And you know what? In this instance, we don't get that kind of success. Dawn of the Nugget, having to have Mrs. Tweety in it one more time when clearly any of those guys in that facility could have been the real main bad guy. But no, apparently it's Mrs. Tweety, whom is in fact responsible for this whole thing. That's right, so just like what happened in the first film when she attempted to use eggs and a pie machine to try and generate profits, this time we have an entire facility generated for meat and poultry. And you know what? The magnitude at least is impressive to know it. And the whole intention that she has had this entire time makes this almost even worth it. Because the stakes are indefinitely raised. And Ginger, much like in the first film, does struggle against the likes of Mrs. Tweety. You not only get them battling within the main machine itself, in the innards of the building entirely, at the same time that we have the likes of the other chickens, including Molly, trying to assist everybody, and also to ensure that none of the chickens whom are still hypnotized fall into the meat grinder. But we also do eventually get the notes that the other chickens eventually break free as the control center is eventually shut off. And so they're not only able to escape, Ginger is also eventually able to get Mrs. Tweety off of her. And when they do make their getaway with the nearby truck, while Tweety does go after them again, she unfortunately flops, basically becoming a giant chicken of her own accord, with a ton of breadcrumbs covering her body. That at least is pretty funny, you know? But being compared to all that gravy that she was covered in the first film, I wouldn't be that surprised. This kind of defeat seems to be a recurring trend. In the same way that a lot of things happen to be repetitive, Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget is unfortunately somewhat confident in its own accord, but doesn't necessarily live up too much in its own unique notoriety. So with that in mind, I will say that there are a few good things about this movie. You have unique coloring, which does help to make it a bit more appealing to the eye compared to the first film, but that is another one of the main problems here. Apart from bringing back Mrs. Tweety, not giving us the idea that she was killed in the first film, and not even giving us the idea that there was apparently a child of the Tweetys whom had grown up to have a lot of hatred on the chickens because of what they did in the first film. You know, that at least would have been convincing. A Mrs. Tweety Jr. or something like that. That at least would have been a bit more appealing than just having Mrs. Tweety herself. But you know what? I'm willing to let all of it slide. And I still feel like that it is a decent film if you're willing to look past a lot of these different issues here. And more importantly, for those who are hardcore fans of Aardman films, there's plenty to choose from. Pirates of the Misfits, Wallace and Gromit, Early Man, Flushed Away. You got tons of picks to choose from. And I have talked about some of the movies in the past alongside Chicken Run. I will probably get to some of them in a bit. In any case though, Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget compared to the first film doesn't really give us the unique dark sense of notoriety that it was known for. It also doesn't give us the inspiration that was Rocky the Rooster. It doesn't give us any of the kind of hard work and perseverance that was known in the first film. It also doesn't really have all that much involvement of the other chickens, mainly with the likes of Ginger, Rocky, as well as their daughter Molly, as well as her friend. So, apart from all that, with more human interactions going on rather than the chicken interactions, with a lot more other things to be considered, this film is only going to get itself a somewhat medial scoring of 6.0 out of 10.1. So, not really something worthy to look at on Netflix or possibly even elsewhere. But overall, it's not really something for me to complain about. It's a sequel. It's what's to be expected nowadays. And a lot of things have just come around that one might not normally want to associate with. Still, it's alright to let it slide and just let it be known by fans of Netflix films or otherwise. I'll be back next week with more stuff here, but as for new film reviews, Absolution is probably where I'm just going to cap it all off. And I will basically have a few more of these reviews set up out before I eventually put films I'm willing to talk about again at an end once more. So, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side if you want to see more on the channel.
Usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.